It's time to start painting this car. As you guys can see, I've already removed the TR6060 and the 383 big block Mopar in order to start getting to all this other stuff that I've got to remove before I can go ahead and paint the engine bay. In addition to just sanding and painting, we're going to actually be making a few changes. We're going to be closing up all of these extra holes that are all over the place that we're not going to use. A bunch of stuff that's on the firewall that we're not going to use. That big square where the old fuse box used to go that we're not going to use. And then we're also going to cut out a big hole right around here, and if I figured things out correctly, that's going to give us enough room to install something really cool on this car that you guys might enjoy a little bit down the road. As you can see, the front end is also completely unpainted. I need to clean up and sand down a little bit of the cross member and then give that a quick paint job. But overall, it doesn't seem to be a huge job. It's just going to be a hassle taking apart all of this stuff after I've already gone and installed it the first time. So we're building this car basically from scratch. It's just going to suck a little bit when we take it apart just to paint it and then put it all back together again. But hopefully when I put it back together, it's going to look a lot better the second time than it does, you know, kind of right now. As far as I know, we're not going to be using any of these holes anymore, so if we don't need them, might as well close them up. But it'll also make everything look a little bit cleaner once it's all painted. This is kind of what we're going for. I'm not trying to erase the marks completely. I could always go in and touch it up with a little bit of body filler and try to block sand most of this out, but it's really not necessary. There's a couple spot welds here that aren't actually holes, and I'm just gonna leave those alone. I was gonna try to fill them in, but really it's not that necessary. There are a couple holes behind the master cylinder and the proportioning valve, so I'm gonna go ahead and fill those up when I remove that. I've actually gotta go in and wash all of this before any primer goes on because it's been saturated in oils and different fluids, and so I'm trying to clean this up before you lay the primer down. That way when you lay the top coat, the oils aren't going to come up and ruin the entire thing or have it flake off. I'm going to try to completely prevent that. And so to do that, I'm going to remove all of this, and then we're going to hit everything with a little bit of grease and wax remover. After that, we'll hit everything with primer, and once the primer's down, you'll be able to tell whether or not the primer is reacting to anything underneath. If everything looks good, then you'll go ahead and spray the top coat on top of that. If you guys have noticed, I didn't actually start welding this side because, as I mentioned, we're trying to make a little bit more room here for some activities, so we're going to go and cut this probably about an inch underneath this line so that way I don't lose this flange, and then we're going to go down along here and then maybe do a diagonal cut so it meets back up to this hole right here. Below that, there's an area that's full of spot welds, and I haven't decided yet if I'm going to cut the spot welds out and remove it along with this piece, or if we're going to leave them there and leave kind of a 1 inch or 1.5 inch flange away from here just to keep this open. So as I cut this and as I go through it, I'm going to see just how much room I'm actually going to need. Okay, so here's a piece that I just cut out, and we left a pretty large hole. My concern is that as I'm driving, I'm going to be kicking up rocks and dirt and stuff, and it's all going to bounce off of whatever ends up being here and then into the engine bay. So once I get the proper tire fitment, actually on the other side you can actually tell what fitment I'm going for. Once I get the other wheel onto this car and I get everything lined up over here, I'll be able to more or less set up some splash guards that are going to come more or less kind of like this. As long as they don't contact the wheel, I can pretty much do whatever I want. But in order to figure that out, this spot has to be filled, the exhaust has to be ran through, and everything's got to be done before I can go and figure out any kind of splash guard. The bottom lip, I was just going to leave it hanging, and then I noticed that we had a crack right here that led all the way up. So I said, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to try to fix this crack in the sheet metal just to have a little sharp flange. So I just bent it over. I hit it with my rubber mallet, bent it over on this side, and then I'm probably just going to weld it across here, just give it another little point of structure in case I want to drill through it or tap it or do something. I'll have a little bit of extra meat right here on the bottom. It keeps any kind of sharp edges from forming right here. I did clip the corner off of this, so I won't be stabbing myself and cutting myself because I've done that one too many times, and I've still got to clean up this area right here. But overall, I think it's coming out pretty good. Now that I know what holes I'm going to use and which holes I'm not, I can go ahead and cover things like this. I think those ones over there were for the heater valve, which I will actually end up using one eventually, just not right now. But now that we've finished the two inner fenders, it's time to work on the dreaded Firewall. I've actually been debating on whether or not I should even do this whole thing because of the fact that there's just so many things currently on the Firewall. It's a hassle to just go and undo any of the work that I've already done in the past. It's really not that many things, but because I'm by myself, it tends to be a little bit more difficult than it has to be. It's just the blower motor, the heater box, throttle cable, clutch slave cylinder, brake master cylinder, and brake proportioning valve. The only other thing beside that would be the steering column, but I might not remove that one and just leave everything taped up. But if I do have to remove it, it's not a huge deal. It's just going to be a pain when it's time to put it back on. I'm still working at all the little holes and repairing some damages like this stuff right here. But what I'm going to focus on right now is actually filling in this hole. I don't need it anymore. This is where the old fuse box used to go, and it was also where the bulkhead connector that led into the cabin, that's where that used to go as well. So I need to make a cover that kind of fits this general shape, and then I'm just going to go ahead and weld it in because I have something else that's going to go in on the backside. And so what I did, I grabbed a sheet of paper and I kind of just dusted a pattern to kind of match what we're looking at here. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, trace it onto a piece of steel, and then once that's taken care of, I'm going to more or less get this thing as close as I can. It won't be super accurate because I'm not going to introduce these little cuts or this little arrow, but that's not going to matter because I'm going to be able to fill that in with weld anyway. The most important thing is that it matches the inside of here, and then I can straighten out the sheet metal as I work around it. The key to making this easy is to actually get the fit up as close as possible. So you might want to make it a little bit oversized without going too much. Then you can fine tune it with the flap wheel a little bit here and there until it fits as close as possible. I went ahead and started with the gaps that were the closest together. I also welded a little handle onto the plate. That way it was easier to maneuver the plate against the Firewall, so that way I could bend and twist the Firewall in order to close all the gaps. Since I used the thicker metal for the plug than I did for the Firewall, I could use the plug as kind of my straight edge, and then I would be able to straighten out the Firewall as I'm twisting the plug around. This is basically what it looks like after I've already welded it all in. I need to go ahead and cut the little handle off. It's extremely hot. I basically just tack welded the whole thing. I started up here, then I jumped over to the side, and I just kept moving so that way I could start straightening out this part of the Firewall. When you weld something, it tends to shrink, so every time I welded a little bit more, it got harder and harder to maneuver. So as soon as I got it fairly close, I went ahead and I just zapped as most of it as I could. But for the most part, it came out as good as I could probably get it for right now. There's a lot of contamination here in the sheet metal, so that also didn't make it too easy for me. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the handle off and then knock down all the raised welds like these ones here, that one right there, and then everything that's right here. And there we go, we have no more bulkhead hole. The only thing I have to do now is jump on the other side, ground down the back side, just to make sure I don't have any kind of excessive weld sticking out of the back side of the Firewall, make it all look nice and pretty. And then everything's gonna get sanded down a little bit so we can spray some primer on here, and that'll start to give us an idea of where we're gonna have to add a little bit of body filler, where we're gonna have to knock some things down. This is as much prep as I can possibly do. A lot of it couldn't be brought down to bare metal because there's a texture here on this paint, and so there's a lot of divots. I could go and try to grind this stuff out, but if this is a high spot and that's a high spot, and I've already knocked down all the high spots, when I put in the high build primer and then block sanded, it should come out pretty straight. Same thing goes for most of the stuff that we did over there. And then I'm not too worried about the inner fenders. Those are probably gonna look pretty good. I did hit several areas with the DA, and there are a few low spots, but if they're not super noticeable, I'm just going to paint over them. The last thing I need to do now is just blow everything off and then hose some areas down with some wax and grease remover, just because some of those areas had oil contamination, and I don't want the oils to come up in the primer and then cause a bunch of problems in the future. So in order to alleviate that, I'm going to go ahead and clean everything as best as possible. There is a brake line that goes all the way to the back of the car. I'm just going to add a little bit of tape to it just to cover it, and the rest of the bottom of the car is actually going to be painted up on the lift. So I'm just going to try to get it as best as I can from up top, and whatever I can't do on top, I'll do it from the bottom at a later date. So as long as the most visible parts look good, I'm happy. I do need to tape off all the holes leading into the cabin and a bunch of holes that lead out to the suspension, and I need to start laying down some plastic both on the floor and on the cross member that goes in between. I'm not going to completely take apart the car, so I'm going to try my best to get as much of it as possible. Even though I know it's not going to get 100%, it's still going to look way better than it does right now. So I actually panicked for a second because I had ran out of plastic and there's still a ton more work to do. So what I ended up doing is I grabbed a bunch of paper that I had laying around from a previous shipment that I just recently got, and it seems to be able to do the job just fine. So crisis averted. Now it's time to start getting some primer on this thing. I just finished the first coat of poly primer or polyester primer. In other words, it's a high build primer designed to act almost like a very thin layer of body filler over the whole thing. So now from here, you're supposed to let it cure at least 3 hours. I'm actually going to let it cure overnight, and then I'll go and block sand it in the morning. Once everything is block sanded, I can hit it with regular primer followed by primer sealer, and then after that we can hit it with a color coat. So it is now the next day and the poly primer has completely cured. I've already started the block sanding procedure, and the only thing I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to level out the primer against the metal a little bit. You see all the shiny spots, those are the high spots, and then all the white spots, those are the low spots. So as long as I can get an even square along the flat surfaces, the high spots will level out to the low spots, and it'll tend to take off some of that waviness. There are some spots where they're just way too low, like for example here, this area there, and I could go in now and then apply some body filler and then sand over that. But it is an engine bay and it really doesn't matter that much. There's also some spots here, and everything around here. So the only thing I want to do is try to clean it up as best as possible, but we're not going to really detail anything. The whole point of the high build primer is just to kind of give everything a nice even surface without me having to plaster body filler all over the place. I want the engine bay to look good, but it doesn't have to look absolutely pristine. That's not what we're going for. So the only thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to blow everything off. I'm going to wipe everything down with a clean cloth just so I can get all the dust out of here, and then we're going to hit it with some urethane primer. I ended up doing 3 coats of primer in total. The first one, as you guys saw, was the poly primer. That was followed by a second coat of urethane primer, and then after that I had a third coat of urethane primer, but with the third coat I actually tinted it with a little bit of base coat, and I did that for 2 reasons. The first was because it's easier to see the contrast of the gray from the previous coat of primer to the more pink primer color that was going to go on top of it. The second reason is that if I tint the primer, it's going to give me better coverage when I do the color coat. And now that I've sprayed down the third coat of primer, I can see all of the imperfections of places where I missed, so I'm going to make sure I touch those areas up when I go through with the color coat. Because the primer and the color coat are going to be very similar in color, you won't notice a transition as much as you would if you had dark gray underneath followed by bright pink. I just finished laying down the first layer of base coat. I actually don't have too much experience laying down base coat clear coat combos. It's usually single stage, so I'm used to it coming out like fairly shiny, but for this, the more it dries, the more opaque it gets. So as it's drying, all my errors are going to be popping up, so it looks like I completely missed a spot right over there. There's also some areas down there that I need to take care of, and over here there's another section. So I'm going to be doing anywhere from 3 to 4 coats of base coat, depending. It could be 2 depending on just how heavy they are, but I'm expecting about 3 coats of base coat before I actually finish this. So in that time, I'm hoping I can hit all the errors first, then lay down the second coat, and then hopefully I don't have to do a third coat, but we're just gonna have to see. All right, so we're skipping ahead, and I just laid down the clear coat. I feel like I should lay down at least 1 more. It doesn't look as shiny as I was thinking. I think I've got about 3 coats on here right now. If I wait for this to cure, I could probably buff it out, but honestly, as long as it looks halfway decent, which it actually does, it looks pretty good on camera, so I'm pretty happy. But after the engine's in here and all the other stuff is in here, you're really not going to notice it too much. I'm going to go ahead and leave it curing overnight, and we'll see what it looks like in the morning. So now we're at some 14, 16 hours later, and the car looks pretty darn good. There are some areas where I think I could have done a little bit better job, specifically back there where it's not quite as shiny. Also had a little bit of overspray down there and missed a spot right there. You can barely see it. And then there's a little bit of overspray right behind the steering box, but because of the grime that we have on the steering box, that might actually just wash off. So I'm not worried about that overspray or the overspray on the torsion bars, because those are also covered in oil. I'm going to go through and hit it with some degreaser, and most of that should come right off. Whatever doesn't, I could just spray over it. I had a lot of overspray down over there, and so I'm going to need to take this apart and clean it, which is fine. This whole front suspension is actually going to be taken completely apart when I replace every single one of these bushings, and then I'm going to be replacing the sheet metal K-frame with a tubular K-frame. So all of these little details are going to get taken care of as it gets torn apart. One mistake that I did do is I waited too long before taking off the tape, and so I had a little bit of peel back, specifically right there, right over there. a little bit on the firewall, but lucky all of that tape got pushed in, and so we got the peel back going inward. But I was just going to let it sit up for about an hour or so and then pull the tape, but then I went to go do some errands and I completely forgot about it. By the time I got home in the evening, it was just too late. There was nothing I could really do about that. The good news is that when the windshield gets installed, there's going to be a weather strip here, and so you won't even see that corner at all. But my biggest mistake was actually right here where I installed the tape incorrectly, and now we've got an exposed piece of metal here without any kind of primer or paint. So I'm gonna have to figure out a solution for that. That's not something I'm gonna be tackling right now, but it is gonna be on my list. Everything else though, I'm pretty happy. I'm going to wait a couple days before I hit any of this with any type of compound. There is a little bit of overspray from the clear here and there, so if I hit it with the compound, I should be able to knock the clear coat overspray off and then get some of that shine back, specifically in that area, maybe some area around the cowl and some areas back there. But there are a few key details like the shock towers, these flat area right here, that part of the cowl right there, and then where the wiper motor goes. Those are the areas that I paid extra attention because that's where the eyesight lands when you're checking out the car. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the way things turned out. In the next video, we're going to be swapping some drivetrain back in here, so stay tuned for that. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher, signing out.